My plan includes using truth cards. Truth cards are simply index cards that I have written truth on. Real simple. They come spiral bound. You can get 50 cards bound like this, which I find the most convenient. Or you can get individual index cards, of course, and punch holes in them and use binder rings if you'd like instead. In any event, having a set of truth cards at hand throughout this journey is extremely helpful. On the inside cover of my truth cards, I have written down what my primary boundary is and my secondary boundaries. The second thing that I thought was the most important to put in my truth cards was all the reasons why I know eating within 0 to 5 boundaries, great, good, and godly, and why I want to adhere to this boundary. And so I have a couple of pages in my truth cards where I have listed those things. Early in my cards then, I wanted to be sure that I had a reminder of why this is an important thing to go through, why it's important for me to renew my mind using my truth cards every day. And so there are times when you just don't feel like doing it. So I figure if I went through a couple of my cards and then suddenly I kind of was going, I don't need to do this today. Well, presto, I've landed on Barb's Renewing of the Mind questions. And they're questions that you can ask yourself when you don't feel like renewing your mind. I think that's great. I've also included some of the activities that I've done from Barb's website. So living according to 0 and 5, not living according to 0 and 5, comparing them. I also have included quotes in my cards. Quotes can come up on the blog site in the comments, quotes from people who have talked to me in classes that I've been in, or just things that when God struck me with them, I thought, oh, that works pretty well. I'll include that. So I've included my little statement, eat half as much food, twice as slowly, and the last bite happens at the same time. Another bite will not bless me. So I've also included other things. And there are verses that I've included. I've gone to Barb's Bible studies, and at the end, she often has great verses there that we can use to kind of renew our minds about that area of our life, whether it's careless eating, justification eating, or insecurity, whatever it might be. I've also included some of her sets of questions, entitlement eating questions, since that's kind of a struggle for me at times. And then I've highlighted the questions that really pop out to me and make a difference. Do I think God agrees with my outlook of entitlement? What usually happens when I live by my rights and my feelings in this area of my life? See, these are really good questions that kind of put me in my place, which I kind of need. And then one of the things that's kind of interesting is again and again in Barb's questions, the last 3 or 4 questions will include the following. Are boundaries easy to follow, or do you usually have to give up something to follow them? Well, hello. What will I have to give up to follow my boundaries this time? And what will life look like a few months down the road if I develop the habit of consistently following my boundaries? And when I think of what I will gain, is it worth the sacrifice? Because I've gone over my truth cards so many times, and because those questions are there in so many of the pages that I have in my truth cards, those questions pop into my head even when I don't want them to. And really that's a good thing, because I usually don't want them to when I'm preparing to eat outside of my boundaries. And yet right then, as I'm heading outside of my boundaries to eat that second portion, are boundaries really easy to follow, or do you usually have to give up something in order to follow them? That'll pop into my head. Or what will I have to give up in order to follow my boundaries this time? When I think of what I will gain from following my boundaries, is it really worth it? Questions that are kind of penetrating for me, that challenge me. Like, what are my choices saying to the world? What are my choices saying to the women I minister to? If any of you were to be here in my home and see me and just kind of stay with me for a while, would I have to be fake? Or could I invite you into my home to see the way I live? And am I living what I'm teaching, what I'm speaking about? What could I learn about God and myself if I sit in whatever it is I'm struggling with that makes me think about food right now instead of eating my way through it? I also have just kind of an exclamation, living a life free from the control of food. Think of it. Anyway, I've also included me at my largest with a little caption, life without boundaries, do you really want to go there? See, when I'm going through my truth cards, it helps me to remember from whence I came. It helps a lot. I'm eating when I'm not hungry. I'm eating for some other reason. And what would it really take to satisfy me? Those are really good questions to ask. I love this question too. How often will you follow your boundaries if you only follow them when you feel like following them? See, that question is now in my thinking. So when I'm facing down something outside of my boundaries, that question can pop into my head. Blended. I have verses, I have questions, I have statements, I even have quotes from the book. Following your boundaries questions. Now, if there's any set of questions at Barb's website that you should include in your truth cards, I'd have to say it's this one. The questions that are asked, I've highlighted all of them because I want to be sure I read them. Every time I do my truth cards, I'm reading these. And I want these questions in my mind. Is there ever a good or an easy time to follow your boundaries? What would you gain today by starting to faithfully follow your boundaries today, even when it's difficult? What do you think will happen if you don't start today? What sacrifices will you have to make to lose and or maintain your weight? And for some of us, this isn't about weight. It's about honoring God with our eating and drinking. So you could change that question. What sacrifices will you have to make to honor God with your eating and drinking? Do you have to make those sacrifices no matter when you make the commitment to follow your boundaries? Do you think it would be better to start following your boundaries faithfully now and just get it over with? Or is there a good reason to wait? And are you the type of person that can go without boundaries in this area of your life and still accomplish your goals? If not, what do you need to accept? So if you have a Thin Within book or a Thin Within workbook, you can use those books, pull out quotes from them. And here's one from the Thin Within book. Celebrate all those times you have practiced spirit-filled eating. Give thanks to God for all those times you relied on the Spirit and took a stand against your flesh. See, that's a great thing to include in my truth cards. It's an encouragement to celebrate the choices that I make that are good, that are honoring to God. Nothing and no one should master us but Christ. That's true. We have the freedom to enjoy many delightful things. That's true. So it makes sense that it's in my truth cards. Yet we never need again accept the constraints of obligation or obsession. That is true as well. Here's a quote from page 95 of the Thin Within book. Failure should be our teacher, not our undertaker. Failure is delay, not defeat. It is a temporary detour, not a dead end. Failure is something we can avoid only by saying nothing, doing nothing, and being nothing. I love that quote about failure. And then I love this. At the blog this week, Adrienne posted why her boundaries are good. And I swiped her stuff and I put them in my truth cards because it's so good. My boundaries make me conscious of when and how much to eat. My boundaries help me to stop and consider what I'm doing. Sticking to my boundaries will be life-changing. Sticking to my boundaries gives me peace, hope, and joy. When I stick with my boundaries, I find my satisfaction in God instead of food. Following my boundaries improves my health. Following my boundaries makes me feel better physically, spiritually, and emotionally. When I stay within my boundaries, I feel closer to God and I like myself better. Staying in my boundaries feels so good. My body and spirit feel happy. Without boundaries, I go wild, like out of control. They help me to have a willing spirit and to stay focused. I love that list from Adrienne. Can you make a list too of why your boundaries are good and wonderful for you? I bet you can. Put them on truth cards. You might only want to make a couple a day, but then eventually you'll have a set.